Hey guys, welcome to a new Davinci Resolve 17 tutorial. Today's video is going to be different from my usual tutorial videos because I am reviewing a plugin called Dehancer Pro. Quick disclaimer, Dehancer did send me this plugin for free in exchange for a review video, and of course my opinions in this video will be honest, and at the end of the video I will be discussing the pros and cons of this plugin. I have been using the Dehancer Pro plugin for the past few weeks to test it on a few video clips and projects that I'm working on, and I'm very impressed with the amount of features in this plugin. Now, what is the Dehancer Pro plugin? It is pretty much an all-in-one film stock emulation plugin which includes film stock characteristics like film profiles, halation, bloom, film grain, gate weave, film breadth, and more features like ACES support and LUT generator. All of this is packed into an easy to use plugin that simulates analog controls, replicating how real film behaves under these controls. It is a Davinci Resolve 16 Plus versions only at the moment that works on Mac OS and Windows 10. Now, who is this plugin for? This plugin is for filmmakers, cinematic vloggers, wedding videographers, professional colorists, or anyone who wants to create film stock looks to make their image look more vintage or cinematic without having to use a dozen nodes to get something that looks incredible. The Dehancer Pro plugin costs $399, which gives you all the features Dehancer has to offer, and you get the free updates. You can get the other plugins like the light version or the grain only or bloom only or halation only, depending on what you need or will use often, and the prices range from $49 to $299. And you can check out the list of plugins on their website. All of their plugin versions come with 2 seats, which I'm pretty sure it means that you have 2 licenses, so if you want to install it on your desktop and laptop, you can have this plugin on 2 computers at the same time. If you want to know more in depth what these features are exactly and what they can do, I would suggest going to their website, which I'll be putting a link in the description below, because their articles explain each film characteristics very well. But I'll quickly explain what some of these features do to your image. So with the film profiles, they currently have around 60 film stocks ranging from many different companies like Kodak, Fujifilm, Cinestill, Konica, and more, ranging from motion picture films to color negatives, to color positive films, to black and white film stocks, and much more. The bloom is pretty much another word for glow, which this plugin you can add bloom to the highlights, which gives your footage a glow effect that replicates the characteristics of shooting on a vintage lens or using a pro mist filter. Halation appears as a red-orange glow fringe, kind of like the chromatic aberrations to a digital image, to the bright contrasting areas of the image. Now, the film breadth feature replicates a noticeable shift in exposure and color to the image. This effect is also sometimes referred to as flicker depending on the plugin you use, and more often than not it's very subtle. And the other feature of this plugin is the gate weave. The gate weave replicates the film stock moving through a frame window in a projector or film camera, which creates a little bit of a shake or wobble in the image, and this is quite noticeable with old movies on Super 8mm, 8mm or 16mm film stocks. Anyway, let's open up Davinci Resolve 17 and let's see this plugin in action. So I've opened up Davinci Resolve 17 and these are my clips over here. So I'm in the color tab. I'm just going to go to this clip here just because we can see our talent clearer, and we've also, when we play it back, we've got some really nice contrasting areas. So what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 nodes. The second node is going to be the Dehancer plugin, and the first node is I'm going to apply color space transform, just because I like how it works inside of Davinci Resolve instead of using the plugin, because in the plugin you can also adjust the color space as well, but I prefer doing it this way. Okay, cool. So I've just done my color space transform, and that gives you a nice Rec 709 profile. And then now I'm going to go and I'm just going to go to the second node, and I'm just going to type in Dehancer Pro. And then as soon as I add it in, it's already done some adjustments. With the input, it's set at Rec 709. Since I've already done my color space transform, that's what we want. Now I'm going to collapse all of these just so you can see the features inside of the Dehancer plugin. I'm going to be going over what these features do. I'm not going to go over all of it just because this is going to be a very long video if I do. But if you're interested in trying this software out, you can actually go to the Dehancer website and download a 2-week free trial so you can play around with the settings and experiment with some looks, and also see if you want to purchase this as well. So I'm just gonna I'm happy with input. You've also got defringing. Now that just gets rid of like chromatic aberration and a bit of fringing, so I'm not going to check that. You can check it if you want. I'm going to go down to film. This is where you can choose your film stock profiles. Now this is absolutely incredible. So Vision 3 is like a modern cinematic color, a film profile. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of film profiles in here. So I'm just going to choose the first option, which is the ADOX Color Implosion 100. I'm going to use my scroll wheel on my mouse to just cycle through different colors or film profiles that I like. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of adjustments that it's doing depending on which film stock you choose. I like Kodak Ektar 100. So with the push-pull, when you slide this to the left and right, it adjusts the color and contrast a little bit. This mimics how film stocks work depending on the exposure levels. I'm not going to go into it just because they've got a really good article on it on their website. So if you're interested, check out their website. So yeah, basically the next three settings are your color correction settings. So expand, you've got, your black point, so you can adjust, if you bring this to the right, you can see that it's pulling the blacks down. And then with the white point, if I bring this to the left, it pulls the white point up towards the bright highlights. So I'm just going to reset these. Color mode, I'm not 100% sure what it does exactly. I just leave it at normal. So with prints, exposures are self-explanatory. So I'm just going to leave it there. Tonal contrast, this is just shifting your contrast. So it's pulling your highlights to the highlights and then pulling your blacks down. It's just stretching the overall image. And then color density, this is an interesting one. I'm not sure why it does it exactly, but I usually like to see more colors. So it's going to be affecting the skin tones and her red hair. So when I bring the color density up, you can see that it's adding more reds, more color into, I guess, the brighter areas. It's making it more saturated. Underneath you've got saturation. That just basically brings the overall saturation of the whole image down to 0, so it's going to be black and white. You've also got analog range limiter. I'm not really sure what it does exactly, but it compresses, so it looks a bit more flatter. I'm not going to explain exactly what that is just because I'm not really sure. So yeah, with the color head, this one's interesting. It pretty much does the exact same thing as your primary wheels here and your printer lights as well. So, over here. So, when you bring the blues up, it's going to make your image blue, magenta and green. So, you can play around with the settings, reset everything. And then I'm going to check gain. What this does is it, adjusts everything evenly. Preserve exposure. This just simply means that, we basically by default it's 100. I prefer to keep it at 100. If you bring it down to 0, it's going to be adjusting the exposures as well instead of just the colors in certain areas. Impact is basically like your blend mode. You're happy with how it looks, but it's too intense. You can dial it back a bit so you can get a good blend mode between the two. Film grain. So by default, it's already enabled. So the size, I'm just going to adjust the size just so you can see it. So when I adjust the size, it basically makes the grain particles larger. I'm going to leave it at default. Actually, you know what? I'm going to bring it up just a little bit for this tutorial. The amount just adjusts the amount of grain particles. So when I bring that up to 100, there's quite a fair bit. This is pretty interesting how film resolution works. So it figures out how much grain particles you have on the screen and it adjusts the film resolution accordingly. So 50%, it's pretty much like the sharpness of the image. So 50%, it's kind of blurry. You've got a bit of loss of details. So when I bring this up to 100, it pretty much just leaves the sharpness, the original sharpness of the image. And then, if you bring it all the way down, you can see that it blurs the image slightly depending on how much film grain particles you have. So I'm going to leave that at, I usually like to have it around like 75, 80%, just because when you're doing this, you want it to be fairly unsharp. The next features are the shadows, midtones, and highlights, and this basically adjusts how much grain will be in the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So I like to have the shadows, having hardly any grain particles. Midtones I like to have a fair bit. Highlights, you can bring it all the way down so there's less grain in the highlights, but I like to crank it up to 100, just make it dramatic and, really easy to see. So chroma, if I bring this all the way to the right, it adds colored grain particles in there. And then if I bring chroma all the way down to the left, it just makes it black and white. Halation and Bloom, these are some really cool features that you don't see this in a lot of film stock emulation plugins. With halation, this adjusts the fringing on the edges depending on the brightness of your image. So we've got some high contrast points here. So let's just enable it first. So by default, it's not enabled. So let's just check it. And it doesn't really do too much. There's a little bit of an orange fringe over here. Let's just go into mask mode so you can see exactly what it's doing. Source limiter, if I adjust it towards the left, it adds more details in. Background gain, if I bring it down all the way to the left, it makes it less intense. And then if I bring it all the way up, you can see that it adds a bit more detail. So there's a bit more of a red spill over here. Smoothness, I'm guessing this just makes it a bit smoother. I'm not sure exactly what it does, but let's bring this up a bit. Local diffusion, this just affects the main parts that will be affected. So if there is diffusion, so whatever the area is around it, it's just going to add a bit more diffusion. So global diffusion, this just adds a bit more red into the midtones as well as the overall image. Amplify, let's just really make this dramatic, and let's bring this up just so we can see what it's doing. Hue, this is if you want more of a yellow cast, you bring it all the way over to the right side, and then if you want it to be more of a deep red, you bring it all the way to the left. Blue comp, I'm not really sure what that does exactly, so I'm not going to really play around with that. And then impact is like the intensity of it as well, so let's just bring it down just a little bit. Let's just uncheck the mask mode. So now you can see that it's affecting the contrast areas quite a fair bit. You can see quite a lot of halation over here. So let's just enable it so we can see what it's doing. So it adds a bit more of a red tint. So the bloom works kind of like how halation works. So you have to enable it. So let's just enable. And as you can see, it adds a bit more of a glow diffusion on the overall image. So let's just enable mask mode just so we can see what it's affecting. When I go back up to the top, you've got highlights. So with the highlights, it just finds the brighter parts of the image, and it just makes it a bit more brighter and catches more detail in the image. So as you can see, it's also adjusting the details as well. Source limiter, this just limits the source. So if I bring this down to 0, there's pretty much no limits, and it's affecting a lot of the image. Details is if you got 100, it picks up a lot of details. Then if I bring it down to 0-ish, you start losing details in the image. So diffusion is pretty self-explanatory. If I bring this all the way to the left, it's not going to be as diffused, and it's going to have more of a hard edge. Amplify, I'm just going to bring this up a fair bit just so we can see it. So with impact, it's pretty much the intensity of the overall effect. So if I bring that up to 100, it's quite intense, and then it's almost like a opacity. So I'm going to uncheck that so we can see what it's doing. It adds a bit more of a glow or a bloom to the overall image. Vignette, this is a really nice setting. Let's just enable it. It just basically adds a vignette to your image. I would bring the feather all the way down to 0 just so you can see a hard edge. So you can see that it's adjusting the size of the vignette. But you can see it's also doing a weird thing, inverting and all of that sort of stuff. I'm not sure why it's doing that. I'm just going to leave it around here. Then you can adjust the exposure. So if you want it to be brighter or darker, you can adjust it that way as well. Adjust the aspect ratio. So I'm just going to make it a bit more oval, and then I'm going to bring the feather all the way up to 100, and that just softens the edges. Okay, so with film breath, I'm just going to enable it. And as you can see, it doesn't really do too much to the image. The way this works is period is basically the smoothness of it. So if you want it to be a bit more subtle and smooth, you want to increase the number. So for this tutorial, I'm just going to bring the period down to 1, just because you can see it a bit more random and flickery, I guess you could say. Let me just increase the exposure. As you can see, it's flickering through the exposure, of course. You can bring it all the way down to 0 so it doesn't affect the exposure. Same with the tonal contrast. This is basically just shifting through the contrast. So I'm going to bring that down to 0. And then color. This one's interesting as well because this pretty much works like the color head. It just shifts through the different colors. So that's quite dramatic there. So if you're happy with the way it's cycling through the colors, you know, you can adjust the impact just so it's not too intense. So I'm just going to uncheck that. So you can see you can do quite a fair bit with the film breath or the flicker. So you can really dial in how you want it to look. So the gate weave is very interesting on how this works, but it kind of works exactly the same as the film breath. You know, the period is like the randomization of the gate weave. So the gate weave is the way the film gets pulled through the camera or the projector, which gives it that wobble and distortion. So let's just bring it down to 1 just so we can see what it's doing. So when I play this back, let's just have a look here. So you can see that it's very smooth. It's a gimbal shot. You know, if the camera is still, you can really see what it's doing. But with this clip here, it's going to have some motion. And let's just enable it. So right above enable, you've got auto zoom. So since this is, you know, shifting the wobble and distortion, if you don't have that checked, it's going to have black bars on the edges of your film. You don't want that. So let's just enable that. And as you can see, it automatically zooms in. So as you can see, it's a bit more jerky and there's a bit more distortion. You can really dial in the translation X and Y. So this is just how much it wobbles and, you know, gets distorted. So let's bring this up. You can also adjust the rotation as well. So this is the angle of it rotating. So it'll have a bit more of a wobble instead of a shake, a bit more of a rotation to it. So I'm gonna bring that up a fair bit just for this example. So now you can see that there's a bit more of a wobble going on. The impact again is pretty much the intensity of it. So if you kind of like how it's moving and you don't want it to be that dramatic, the impact will fix that a bit. Yeah, so that's basically how you use the Dehancer Pro plugin inside of Davinci Resolve. So what are the pros and cons to this plugin? Let's start with the pros. The first pro is that this is the most accurate film emulation plugin that I've used. The tools that are in this plugin are easy to use and versatile enough to really dial in a particular look and can be used to complete a full grade within 1 or 2 nodes, which at the same time it can save you a lot of time with your color grading process, and it has a lot of features that help accurately replicate the analog film scan. Another pro is that it has free updates. So when there are new film scans to add, you can add it really easily at no extra cost once you have purchased the plugin. The free updates are for if you have the Dehancer Pro version. And now with the cons. Honestly, there are only 2 cons that I can think of with this plugin, and that's the price, and also that it's quite intense on your computer, especially when you add grain, film breath, and gate weave. But that could just be my computer saying that it's had a good run for the past few years and I should probably upgrade it very soon. Now with the price tag of $399, it is a little bit steep, but considering how they have developed this to be as true as possible to how analog film scans work and how the tools are designed to complement how the analog film stock color is manipulated and the other features you get with the Pro version, I can actually understand that price tag. That's it for this review. So yeah, hopefully this video has helped you decide if you want to purchase this plugin or not. If you are interested in purchasing this product, I would recommend just going to the Dehancer website, which the links will be in the description below. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. If you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell to stay notified for my next uploads. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time.